Well, thank you very much. I did ask to speak because I wanted to thank the organisers, the speakers, but particularly the audience for coming here, because it's you that makes it possible. And in reply to my question, I was told I had 4 minutes, so time's a theme here. I'm going to have to speak quickly, so apologies for that, but I do want to say a few things. When I first heard that this event was taking place, my heart jumped with joy. And I mean that in the fullest sense of the word. The way that grandfather would have defined that word when he was explaining Coleridge's theory of polarity. And I mention that now because that's where I'm going, so now you know what our destination is. But before we get there, this is the year that earlier we had centenary anniversaries commemorating the death of Rudolf Steiner. And 2 years before that we had anniversaries commemorating the burning of the first Gutianum. They were wonderful events, but I felt that they had a tinge of finality to them. They were coming to an end of a period. But this event here that you have made possible is the start of a new period. And that's absolutely appropriate because grandfather was the new generation that had to take up from where Steiner left off when he passed away. So he was the founding father of the Anthroposophic Society, along with his best friend, Cecil Harwood. They were school friends from Highgate School, just up the road here. And together, 5 years after joining the society, they took leadership roles in the councils, and they were council members for 46 years continuously. This dynamic, we could go off on a tangent and talk all about it, but we're not going to. We're going to talk about a third friend that entered into this dynamic. And the name of that third friend was C.S. Lewis. They met in their first term at university in 1919, and the grandfather and Lewis both saw themselves as poets. That's how they identify themselves, and that's what the start of their friendship was about. But you had a dynamic of from 2 going to 3, and of course they had a lot in common. What they had in common was they were both fighting the kind of materialistic, reductive, dominant worldview which is still prevalent. But they also had some things that they argue about, let's put it that way, particularly in their theology. And grandfather explained it, and because he explained it, I think it's worth mentioning, and also because when you put up 2 contrasts, then you can sort of see the difference between them. And grandfather said that these themes, and I'm going to mention 3 of them, are serious, deadly serious. The way we engage with them, and I invite you to engage with them too, the way we engage with them will have meaning, and he actually says that the future of humanity depends on our understanding and how we engage. So the first thing is imagination. So for grandfather, imagination was a vehicle to truth. That through imagination you could get to truth, particularly spiritual truths. Lewis said no, that truth and imagination were separate. He went so far as that you try to put truth and imagination together, you are breaking imagination. It's no longer imagination. Now this was the theme of their Great War, which took place in the 1920s. And through that Great War, grandfather managed to move Lewis from being an atheist to a theist, then to a Christian, but he didn't manage to make a final move into a deep Christian and esoteric. But anyway, Lewis was always referencing and pointing towards grandfather. And Lewis, who was a person who changed his position, the grandfather never changed his position, was on his way to becoming a deep Christian. Anyway, the other theme was history. And can you see any patterns in history? And grandfather said, you can see patterns. It's called historicism. Lewis said no. Lewis was anti-historicism. He couldn't see patterns. In fact, he refused to see patterns. He said there's only one relationship that counts, and that's the relationship of man's soul, know the term to use, man's soul and its relationship to God. And that has remained constant. It always has been, and is, and will be the same. There is nothing that can substantially change that relationship. That's what Lewis said. Grandmother said no. Well, Lewis even said not even the incarnation of Christ will change that relationship. Grandmother said no, the incarnation of Christ is the turning point in time. It happened in a historical period. The change can be evidenced, And not only that, it had cosmic consequences. Anyway, these two positions on history, they have consequences. So for Lewis, he wasn't interested in development, movement, societies. He discounted the Reformation and the Renaissance as being anything significant. Grandfathers thought you can see patterns within history. The relationship between humanity and within humanity, and also the relationship between humanity and the divine, has changed over time. And grandfather said you can see an evolution. In fact, he coined the term evolution of consciousness. He coined that term in 1926 in his second published book, The History in English Words. His first published book was Silver Trumpet, which was a fairy tale, the first England fairy tale, which Tolkien and Lewis absolutely loved. It was their proof of concept, and it inspired them to go on and produce their own, if you like. The last idea is polarity. So this idea which we've touched on, where you have two opposites, and that the dynamics between these two opposites creates a third thing, third reality. Now, grandfather took this seriously because this theory comes from Coleridge. And grandfather, a great champion of Coleridge, great exponent. Some people have said he's the best exponent of Coleridge. But Lewis wouldn't follow him there. And grandfather said it's a great pity that Lewis wouldn't follow him into this, because Lewis was a talented communicator and a populist, and if he had explained this theory, what became known as romantic theology would in fact have made more progress and would have gone in a different direction. But anyway, grandfather looked around for somebody who had taken on this philosophy of Coleridge, so he explored and admired the wide panorama of philosophers who had made a mark since Coleridge, looking for somebody who had understood it deeply, taken it on board and brought it into modernity, and even put it into practice. And he was more than pleased when he did find one person who had done so, and the name of that person was Dr. Rudolf Steiner. So this far we have reached, and I thank you all for being here.
No.